The forested border between the U.S. and Canada doesn't have a wall like the U.S. and Mexico, making it easier in warmer summer months, authorities say, for increasing numbers of undocumented immigrants to cross into Canada from the U.S., where they've been denied asylum or legal documents. But under a new security agreement between Canada and the United States government, immigrants crossing clandestinely into Canada from the U.S. side can be sent back to the U.S. and deported to their countries of origin, if they're caught within 14 days of arriving here in Canada. So many immigrants hide out in these woods during that 14-day period or make their way to Canadian cities here like Montreal, where they are said to move down into the city's metro system underground, sleeping among the city's homeless here. If they can survive undetected here those first 14 days, they can then apply for asylum or other legal documents to remain in Canada. This immigrant who recently arrived, named Pablo, tells me about his 4 friends from Venezuela who crossed into Canada on foot in the snow.
Cuando lo hacían en tiempo de nieve, se arriesgaban muchísimo.
And went through a very difficult time, he says, hiding from the Canadian government on the streets of Montreal.
De pega, de la soledad, muchos amigos les han dado depresión, ansiedad, les dan ataques de tristeza, algunos piensan en terminar con su vida y todo eso, pero por cuestión psicológica de que les pega mucho el estar solos.
Other immigrants here like Ahmed from Algeria are flying into Montreal and obtaining visitor visas at the airport, and then later apply for asylum or work visas. Ahmed says he came here to Montreal to find more stable work as a truck driver or mechanic, with the goal of eventually moving his wife and 3 kids here from back home. As many as 150,000 undocumented immigrants applied for asylum in Canada in the last year, according to humanitarian organizations here.
There is many people, no papers here in Montreal. There is many people, especially in Montreal. There is many people from Africa, from Asia. Many people come to Canada looking for a stabilization.
The Canadian government says it would allow nearly 1.5 million new permanent residents here by 2025 to help grow the workforce, it says, and the economy, but says it will begin decreasing the number of visas given to political refugees and war refugees. Here in Montreal at the Refugee Center, a nonprofit that helps refugees apply for asylum and get settled here, Executive Director Abdullah Daoud, a Palestinian who fled Gaza in his youth, says only 1,000 Palestinian refugees so far have been given asylum in Canada, compared to 200,000 Ukrainian refugees fleeing violence in Ukraine.
We've welcomed thus far over 200,000 Ukrainian refugees. But now when it came to the Palestinian issue, all of a sudden we see the stark contrast of, hey, those are not the type of refugees that we want, thus it's only going to be 1,000.
Adding insult to injury with Palestinians, he says, is the background checks Palestinian refugees face coming to Canada compared to Ukraine refugees.
You'd have to give, your social media history for the past 10, 15 years. You have to give every job you've had since you've existed on this earth. You've had to give very personal or nonsensical information that had nothing to do with you escaping danger. That was not asked of any other population historically in Canada that has tried to come here. And that showed a bias and a glaring form of discrimination against Palestinians.
He says the immigration crisis on the U.S.-Mexico border and the rising anti-immigrant sentiments in the U.S. is something he's starting to notice here.
We're seeing a political polarization like we haven't seen before. We're very influenced to what happens across the border in the United States. We're not immune to that. And I think our politics is trying to mimic what's happening over there. And that's becoming a very scary thing for Canada. Canada has adopted a deterrence policy to ensure that we have less and less and less people coming in to claim asylum in Canada.
He says increasing numbers of Canadians seem indifferent to the plight of refugees arriving here from places like Gaza.
These are situations in which individuals are leaving all their belongings. I have family who's escaped Gaza recently, and it's a nightmare. You fear for your children's lives, you feel for your loved ones' lives, and you're almost in a state of panic, in a constant state of panic, up until even after the moment in which you escaped that immediate danger and you're in a different country. You still have that trauma that's attached to you because you've just recently lost everything.
Chairs from different restaurants.
Still, many other Canadian citizens are making weekly donations of furniture and appliances and clothing for newly arriving immigrants. All the necessary things to start a new life. Donations collected and distributed by nonprofits like Welcome Collective, says the collective's Rani Cruz.
We don't want people to feel like they're still in emergency mode and they're still running. You know, most people, when they arrive, they're fleeing their country for a reason. Their life is in danger, and when they come here, we really want them to feel safe, and we really want them to feel welcome. So we see so many families. So last year, we saw in person over 10,000 individuals.
Cruz says Welcome Collective's mission to help refugees is guided by the United Nations declaration that everyone, she says, has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. But she says increasing numbers of conservative politicians in Canada are blaming refugees and immigrants for housing shortages here and taking jobs away from others.
It's not the fault of newcomers. But they're an easy scapegoat because, you know, as political cycles are only 4 years, they have to find those issues that'll make people go, yeah, I agree with this guy. I'm going to vote for him. And I think what's lacking is the idea that we have lost our compassion, our community compassion, our need to help others, but as a community. And I think we've lost it because politicians have told us that we don't want it. And I think for us, it's just to remind ourselves, actually we do want it. We want to serve our community. We want to make sure our community welcomes people and makes them feel like they're part of something. People are sleeping in the metro right now while they're dealing with paperwork. So the idea that people don't want to welcome people because they're taking away something from us is just, it's not true. I think people want to welcome people. I think we are being told over and over again that we don't. And I think that's the issue. Immigrants want a normal life like everyone else. Immigrants also want to contribute to society.
Abdullah Daoud says his dream as a Palestinian refugee is that one day there is no need for organizations like the Refugee Center. That will only happen, he says, when governments around the world stop waging war on the innocent. He says that produces millions of refugees each year.
We want to live in a society where we're not producing refugees either. You know, we have to look, as Canadians and as Canada as a whole, we have to look at what we're doing internationally to also ensure that refugees is no longer a thing, right?
But he says too many politicians these days prefer to blame refugees for society's problems. Refugees, he says, who are powerless to defend themselves for fear of being deported for speaking out.
Unfortunately, politicians are savvy and they're able to dictate certain terms of public opinion just by giving speeches or trying to blame the other, right? But all the problems that Canada is facing now, for example, whether we see the housing crisis or with our healthcare system, those problems existed when we had no migration during COVID, for example, right? So immigration is the easiest punching bag because those are the individuals that typically can't fight back, right? Or can't speak up for themselves because their statuses are unquestioned, or they're here in a vulnerable status and they don't want to risk it, and they don't get the same type of media attention that a politician would.
In the end, he says, newly arriving immigrants like Ahmed here from Algeria just want a better life for their families, to simply have a stable life. Ahmed says he simply wants to provide his family a normal life, not to be poor, nor, he says, does he want to be rich.
Not important to be rich. The important thing to be stable in your life with your family. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed.
And I love all the good person in all the world.